if they're not qualified to do it.
But who gets to decide?
Well,
What's
that's just the
qualified?
thing.
What's
That's
a
just the thing.
qualifier, and
The
what
the
isn't?
best the best person,
You,
in
me?
my opinion,
Who?
yes, you or me. Honestly, in my personal opinion, the best qualified person to make such an assessment would be a mastered spotter, somebody who can meet somebody, get to know
Okay.
them a little bit, and assess whether or not they are entirely biased,
Then who
whether or
assesses
not
them?
who assesses the
Yeah,
spotter.
yes, I mean, it just like can go on forever, you know.
Well,
and that's why we vote.
in the case of, as it happens to be the case right here, who assesses us would be everybody else.
Yeah, no, I mean the populace itself, I guess, is the one, you know, the ones that assess people that are running for, you know, offices and things like that. So that, I guess, makes sense in a
I
certain
mean,
extent.
if
but
we weren't qualified to do this job, it wouldn't be happening.
I guess, I don't know. I still think it's a tricky subject.
I think that we should have somebody in that field that is in fact qualified to assess the nature of a person's character, because the aside from being
This is my issue, though. Then who is assessing the character of the person who's assessing the character, and then
just
so
as I
forth and
said,
so forth
everybody
and so forth.
everybody
Yes,
else.
no, I know, but it's, you know, it's a weird.
You know, we have a
It's a
whole
sensitive
system
situation.
of faculties available to determine, you know, the
Yes, and one would hope
the
that
nature
there
of
are
person.
honest people that are organizing and performing those faculties, but that's not always the case.
I know, but just to say, for example, who I would say should be placed in that position is obviously going to be a mastered spotter, because these are the people who are going to be able to assess the merit of your character. These are the people who are going to be able to assess, perhaps most importantly of all, whether or not you are in fact an honest person. These are the people who are going to be able to assess, for example, your biases, your potentiality for prejudice. You know, these are the things we need to be taking into account where it comes to this, because in most cases, as it stands, like what is especially evident with the election of Donald Trump, is that a great many people who are exceptionally biased went ahead and voted because, I don't know, what reason? I can't even think of a good reason.
Everybody has their reasons.
I know, but I can't think of it. I cannot honestly think of any good reason why so many people would have gone out and voted for this man.
I can understand. I didn't, but I can understand people's frustration. Absolutely, I can understand that.
Frustration with him having gotten elected, or frustration that led to his election?
That led to it. I can understand that for sure. And I think one of my points about that specific election, I don't want to really talk about politics, but that I think that more people were not voting for one person or another, that they were anger voting against one person or another, and that's different than voting with your conscience and voting with your heart.
Right.
You're voting not for somebody that you truly believe in and think is, you know, good. You're voting against that other person because they're the other, and you're afraid and you're pissed, and of course it makes perfect sense why that would have happened.
Yeah, and
absolutely.
that, in fact, right there is yet another consideration to be taken into account, is that, you know, if the fact of the matter is that people are just voting for Trump because he's the only alternative to Hillary, whom I'm sure a lot of people were very afraid of, if not just extremely distrustworthy of.
A lot of people.
But at the same time, it could very well have been me, although I did in fact go ahead and vote for Bernie twice. But regardless of whether they let him in, I voted for him, and I'll vote for him again and again and again until he's no longer around.
Personally, I wrote in that one high school kid from Texas or some shit called D's Nuts. JK, I did not do that.
I almost wanted to vote for, what's his name, the proclaimed time traveler on Post to Post.
Oh,
who said he was running.
I liked his interview. Oh, I can't remember his name.
He probably would have made a fairly decent president, honestly.
He was a kind of cool dude.
But
that was interesting. Anyway,
another
derail. Oh, Jesus Christ, you're rambling.
Another factor to be taken into account would be in the case that people are anger voting against one candidate instead of for another. It would take a mastered spotter to be capable of assessing whether or not that should be allowed, considering that, I mean, obviously it doesn't,
of course,
because it's not, this is,
part of the beauty
democracy
of the whole thing.
is meant to provide the best candidate based on the assessment of the people in their entirety. When we are voting for one person who is not qualified just because we think the other person is, we don't like them, in some cases that might be correct. In some cases that might have to be chalked up to unacceptable.
Well, what's the alternative then? I mean, there's no...
The alternative would be to have allowed us to fucking elect Bernie Sanders, dude. Damn.
That can happen, so let's do it this time. Anyway, so a very short statement about legislating reasonableness from à-bas-le-ciel, and we got sidetracked, so let's see what else he has to say.
It's not for everybody, it's only for the reasonable people. You can never do that. If you allow people freedom of speech, some are going to use it in an unreasonable way. But Laura Tucker, link below this video, she wrote a completely reasonable account of her sexual experience with this guy, John Kaiman. She does not leap to any unreasonable allegations or accusations. She does not, for example, this is something very common in the 21st century, she does not leap to the conclusion that this guy has a psychological problem. She does not diagnose him and say that he's a narcissist. She does not say that he's a sociopath. She does not say she's a psychopath. She does not do anything like that. She has a reasonable set of reflections on this thing that happened in her life and what it meant for her. She reflects on her own shortcomings and her own feelings, and she reflects on the guy's shortcomings as well. If she does not have the freedom of speech to write this, then I don't have the freedom of speech to write my own autobiography, and neither do you or you or you in the audience. All right, let's face up to that. I think it's important to discipline this sort of discussion about freedom of speech by asking hypothetically, what law would this have broken? What law could this have broken? Do you see what I'm saying? Not just referring to laws as they actually exist today, but if we think this is morally wrong, how would we legislate against it? What would be the limit to be imposed on it? So I see absolutely nothing wrong in the conduct of Laura Tucker here. You can click on the link below this video. I see something here that's really important to praise, because there are so many examples of this kind of controversy that begin with someone pointing the finger and calling somebody a psychopath and a sociopath and making, criminal allegations that are unwarranted and so on, going way, way beyond what this account does. Now, the problem is, and the reason why this is a controversy today, is that Emily Yoffe took this story and wrote a very bombastic, very one-sided, and frankly misleading article about it.
How is that going to cause any kind of effect to happen? So, from what I understand, and we're just kind of taking his word for it now because I haven't read any of. There was a woman, Laura Tucker, who wrote about her experience with this dude, and from what he is saying, it wasn't like weird or creepy, and she didn't claim any allegations against him or anything like that. And then another chick found that tweet or article and started writing about it, so we're now 2 women removed, I guess. It's confusing.
A website called reason.com. So Emily Yoffe characterizes her own motivation.
I don't get it.
She says, quote, My story is about the dangers of moral panics and of applying mob justice and the bazooka of social media to private relations. Here meaning private sexual relationships. If that was her interest, she really chose a very, very poor case study. And there's a rebuttal, I'll give the link in the description again, from Felicia Sonmez. The fundamental question here is, can you judge the act by its consequences? Two different women tell the true story of their sexual relationship, but their sexual experience with this guy. Because they tell their story, a couple other people, a couple other witnesses apparently came forward for other sorts of examples of drunken bad behavior on this guy's part. And that's what we're talking about here. We're not talking about rape. We're not talking about outright simple crimes. But the guy evidently had a lot of drunken bad behavior. And his employer carried out an investigation and pulled these things together. It wasn't mob justice. It wasn't an overnight decision. Felicia sits down. She tells you exactly how many months the investigation went on for and so on. And the employer decided, we don't want you. Okay? Now, I don't know. I don't know if he had a
So this dude was no angel. He was going out, he was getting drunk, and having, I don't know, having dates with different women, and two of them came forward. But one chick got all up in arms about mob justice and the bazooka that is social media, and because this guy apparently lost his job after his employer did an investigation and decided they didn't want him at their company anymore. I guess that's what it sounds like.
Well, remember.
But again, can you judge the act by the consequence?
Exactly. That's what you had mentioned initially, was can you judge the act by its consequence? And in many cases, I do believe, yes, you can, for various reasons, but most particularly the fact that it is not uncommon at all that, and this is speaking off topic as regards to this video for the most part, but just an example of what I mean to say by that, because it seems you and I aren't fully in agreement on this. Well, is that
depends on the circumstance, I would say.
In many cases, you're going to run into scenarios where, say, perhaps you may be a great person. You may have spent your entire life training yourself to be as good and as reasonable and careful a person as you possibly can, but you're going to run into scenarios where you might have to do something that you might consider to be unjust or morally ambiguous or even wrong, in order to accomplish something good for yourself, for other people, to get what needs to get done.
I can see that.
And then there are going to be scenarios wherein, perhaps, I don't want to sound as though I'm coming across like violent or threatening in any way, but maybe, people might have to die in order to prevent tragedies in the future, say, for example.
It's the classic, the needs of the many outweigh the needs
right.
of the few.
And you could say, if you were going to time travel, go back in time, if you could kill Hitler before his reign.
When he's like a baby.
Yeah, would you do that?
Yeah,
well, I
an
mean, it's very
quandary.
difficult to determine that sort of thing because, well, on one hand, you'd want to prevent such a tragedy from occurring, but then on the other hand, what came of it? How many great things have in fact come from that having happened? We're much less likely to engage in a world-ending war because we know how bad it can get due to that.
But so many people had to lose their lives with the regards of the ethical quandary about Hitler and killing Hitler as a baby or whatever. So there's different strategies you could take to do that. If you're, you somehow have the
To kill him?
ability. No, you somehow have the ability to time travel, and you go back, and you know all the information that you've traveled back in time with. Do you just straight up murder a baby because you know what this person is going to grow up and become, or do you try and change the future by maybe removing that child from its situation and giving it a completely different life, the nature versus nurture kind of thing? You can teach. So there are a lot of different strategies when it comes to that kind of situation, and you don't need to you don't need to jump to a fucking
right. Let's go ahead and suggest that perhaps we're dealing with an adolescent Hitler. We don't have to jump to the murdering of a baby. However, you could easily retrain him. You could become influential in his
what
life.
Strategy do you use?
You could eliminate certain factors that allowed for him to get to the position he was in. You can do various things,
right? But you can take out other people that helped him get to the position. Like, there's so many
there's still
possibilities, but you're still gonna be changing everything by doing that, and which no one knows what would happen.
Exactly. By and large, there's still the consideration to be made that, what consequences came of that could very well have been the best case scenario for us.
Exactly.
I mean, who knows what fresh hell we could be living in now had Hitler not set the example of what we do not believe is right.
That's a good point. I don't know. I just think there's certain situations where it's absolutely not okay to judge an act by its consequence. I don't think that seems like whoever is the judge in this situation would have to assume and jump to conclusions without all the information to be able to do that. You're just judging by the consequence, and you have no idea what the act was for or what it accomplished.
To debate that somewhat on two counts. One, there are people who could be qualified to make that sort of an assessment. So it's not impossible. And
again, who qualifies the qualifier?
Well, you know what? Ultimately, if you're going to keep asking that question, I'm going to have to.
You can follow that back.
I'm going to have to give you the only prescient answer that I can provide, which is you do.
But you just expressed your lack of confidence with the ability of the populace to vote in a democratic way to make good decisions. So there's not a nice gift-wrapped answer to that.
Well, I suppose what I mean to say is that, you're capable of looking back on your life, looking forward to your potentialities, and assessing whether or not you, by commonly accepted standards, are in fact qualified to make such assessments. And who knows, it may not be entirely correct, but nothing in life is absolute. It's
of course not.
It's going to be a matter of, can you even manage to accumulate enough information regarding your own personality honestly in order to, determine whether or not you might be the sort of person who can make such an assessment? And B, should you go ahead and do that, by what standard are you measuring that?
Right.
Because a society as a whole is obviously not entirely correct or even anywhere close to that on most occasions.
Right. There is no absolute, like you said, there's no absolutes. There's no absolute confidence that you know, the will of the people is going to be fair or just or correct or logical or reasonable.
Right. And then there's what we're
There's no
speaking to here
guarantee.
is the will of the person, which
Assuming
I don't know how to really
assuming
even
that person is
approach that.
honest.
Exactly,
Which you
honest.
can't
You know what?
assume.
Ultimate honesty would have to be the standard measure by which to even approach this quandary. And of course, you being yourself can, in fact, with absolute certainty, assess whether or not you are an, you know, consistently honest person, and in fact are incapable, that is to say, will never allow for yourself to be dishonest. However, of course, nobody else can attest to that,
Right.
nor can you prove it to anybody.
Exactly. So there's no answer. There's no easy answer to the ethical questions. It's like the thing with the train tracks. You know, there's a baby on one, and there's a group of 10 people on the other, and the train is, you know, 2 trains are coming. Like, who do you save? It's, you know, it's that classic ethical,
Mhm.
you know, question.
In what case, I have a very certain answer for that. You save the baby, obviously, because the other people have very likely already proven themselves to be, at the very least, somewhat dangerous in many different ways.
Yeah, why are they walking on train tracks anyway? A bunch of dummies.
I mean, they've done something wrong. They've been dishonest. They've scammed people. They've hurt
that's
people.
hilarious.
They've lied. The baby may very well turn out to be a fucking messiah.
The baby
You
might
don't
be
know
Hitler,
that.
dude. You don't
The
know.
baby might be Hitler. The baby might be Hitler.
There's always there's nothing but possibilities. Nothing but possibilities. That's funny.
I think that I don't know. See, it's impossible. Honestly, I think that what really needs to be done here is for us to go ahead and just pull a total overhaul and change the way that we manage things entirely, because it's impossible to do it perfectly, and in most cases it turns out to be, in the very least, dramatically misinformed, if not intolerable or damaging.
But that's what humans are. They're misinformed and they're damaging and they're, you know.
Okay, well, let me ask you this.
Unpredictable
Do you believe that
sometimes.
that's what they're intended to be?
How would I know?
Use your intuition. What's your thought? We're not asking for an absolute answer. We're
No, I
asking
know.
for your
I'm
opinion.
saying, how would I know? Why would I have any insight into what the human race was intended
What
to
is
be?
your opinion?
An experiment? Maybe?
An experiment.
Kind of?
An experiment.
I don't know. No one knows what's going to happen. I mean, how else do you...
That's kind of I don't.
How
That
else do you
strikes me as a
define
negative
it?
outlook.
I don't know.
I don't think we're an
You're the one with the
experiment.
Negative outlook. The country that we live in is kind of an experiment. It's never really kind of been done before. You know, we're just figuring.
Then yeah, I think we kind of are an
ourselves
experiment,
out, and
or at
we
least
don't
we're
know.
experimental.
Exactly, and as generations proceed, new things come up, and we deal with new problems and different issues, and it just keeps, going on and improving, which is, an experiment. What is an experiment? It's getting closer and closer and closer to an answer, one, hypothesis and at a time,
Essentially, it's presenting.
Yeah, so it's a developing story. It's a development, like we were talking about earlier, with people developing, and you need failure. Failure is essential for development. It's the same way with everybody as a whole. Failure is essential for development. We have to fuck shit up to learn about it, right?
We have to fuck shit up anyway, baby. Anyway, but to present an alternative hypothesis on the matter, what other rational reasoning or principle dynamics, so to speak, could there possibly be for humanity to be in play at all, let alone developing as it has, evolving as it were, other than to achieve perfection? I mean, that's got to be the ultimate answer to why we're here, is to achieve perfection, right?
By whose definition?
By, I suppose, in that case, we would have to go ahead and make the critical leap into suggesting that it would be God's
Right.
decision,
Right. Some kind of
some sort of. I mean,
what is it called? What do people call it? Oh, a higher power.
Right, or a higher self. Here's the just to present it, because it seems to fit this, and it answers a few questions people have been asking lately throughout the groups, is that what I would have to say, because I mean, obviously, having just said that, people are going to be questioning, well, what is that supposed to mean? What is God? What is, and personally, I say that God, in fact, is the perfection that we do inevitably wind up achieving.
Yeah.
And that, again, the Alpha and the Omega, we have the idea that there is an origin, and that's what created all life, and that's what God is known to be as it stands. But then the Omega is going to have been what we are building, what we are becoming, what we inevitably become. And that would be the true God, is the ultimate finished product.
That's assuming that there is an end.
Right. Well, I mean, perhaps.
What about
there's got to be
infinite?
Some sense of an end at some point, but there could be. Just from me personally, I don't believe in it. I think that eternity in and of itself is an illusion, a trick. But, I mean, obviously it exists in some sense, but we have the eternal now, as it were. But, again, just to give the benefit of the doubt, especially to you, my beautiful, lovely partner here, perhaps we reach this end point, this ultimate perfection, this great being that we are in fact in the process of creating, and that becomes in and of itself yet another beginning.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
But that would be the assessing factor. That would be the person, so to speak, best qualified to make such judgments.
And determinations of what is perfect and what is finished and what is end,
Problem being that the idea we tend to have in mind about what God is nowadays is going to be a terribly imperfect, critical, and lesser than great at making judgments sort of character.
Yeah, it's weird.
Somebody who tends to fuck up a whole hell of a lot even in his own time, and then continues to pass judgment on the rest of us as though he did it right himself.
Yeah, that's interesting.
That's problematic.
Absolutely.
I don't know. We do have synchronicity in play.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, we can always make use of, for all intents and purposes, what we must call divination or fortune telling. I mean, any proper tool can be utilized by a mastered practitioner to give a solid answer that will in most cases always be, at the very least, very close to correct.
Yeah, I would say that's a good tool to have, because, like you said, synchronicity, things don't just pop up for no reason. I don't believe in coincidence.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sorry to drag on in this direction and speak these things the way I am, but the fact as it stands is that we are in fact responding to an atheist activist YouTuber, so presenting, logical discernments regarding the concept of an existing God, I feel is somewhat important to our presentation here. Logic.
Is he logical? You would know more so than I would. No, the YouTuber guy that we're talking about.
Oh, he's very logical. He's very rational, very reasonable. He is, for all intents and purposes, what I'd have to consider to be an intellectual titan. He's a very, to be highly respected sort of a person.
So, would you consider intuition to be the opposite of that logical reasoning thought process, that force that drives, your...
No, honestly...
Because I feel like that's kind of the piece that's missing with the atheists is the intuition...
Why do you say that?
From yourself, because isn't it... I don't really know much about him, but isn't that the whole thing? Is it like there's nothing extra and science is God, and that's it. There isn't anything outside of the purview of the logical...
Be careful. We can't say science is God because there is no God for the atheists.
Well, in a manner of speaking,
it absolutely is.
The worship goes to science instead of theology.
They worship science, or what we call scientism, as being their God, and yes, they do exactly that.
Yeah, it just replaces that theology with science, which isn't like a bad thing, I don't think. I mean, that's... there's science
nothing
is cool and
wrong.
important, and we need it, I mean,
there's
absolutely.
Nothing
but
wrong
we also
with...
need that other part, that intuition, that people act with their hearts and with intuition, and it feeds the synchronicity.
Yeah, okay, well, let me put it this way. The worship of scientism, as it were, is in fact just another form of theology, and atheism in and of itself is in fact a religion. It has all the same factors intact, just going by different names and in different circumstances. But at the same time, I would say that, no, there's nothing really wrong about it, that is, in a manner of speaking, but it is lacking in vital values and elements that are in fact required to make actual progress, insofar as concerned their necessities.
Lacking, like what I said earlier, it's lacking that intuition.
Well, the intuition factor, I would have to say personally, my idea of what intuition actually is going to be the logical faculties of your maybe not subconscious, but the logical faculties of your being, making assessments based on what it knows of you and what it knows of your circumstances, and most especially what assessments it can make insofar as regards your relationship to your circumstances. So in my mind, intuition essentially